All right, so the basic strategy in analyzing validity and with Venn diagrams is that we are going to first draw the premises in a Venn diagram. Then we're going to compare the conclusion to the Venn diagram. We do not draw the conclusion. We only draw the premises. We're going to compare the conclusion to the drawing. Now, if the conclusion is guaranteed by the diagram, then the argument is valid. If the conclusion may or may not happen according to the diagram, then the argument is invalid. Or you could say not valid, invalid or not valid. So let's look at a couple examples, and we're going to see one is valid and one is not, and hopefully this will make a little more sense. So we've got, in both of these arguments, I've got two premises and one conclusion. So we'll start with the first one. If the person is a doctor, then they know CPR. That's our first premise. Our second premise, Juliana knows CPR. Conclusion, so Juliana must be a doctor. So again, we're going to only draw the two premises. So the first step, we'll start with the first premise. If the person is a doctor, then they know CPR. Now remember, if then stands for one set inside the other, and the inside set is with the if. So this is talking about inside set being doctors, and then the outside set would be knowing CPR. So if then means if inside, then outside. So knows, knows CPR is the outside set. Now, the second premise is talking about someone specifically, Juliana. So what I want to do is put Juliana into the picture. And it's usually a little bit easier, especially if you've got a small picture, to use an X to represent something specific. So I'm going to use X to represent Juliana just because then I don't have to try to squeeze the word Juliana into the picture. Now, Juliana knows CPR. So we want to think about where the X would be. Well, we know it would have to be in the CPR circle. So that could be here. But remember, doctors are inside the no CPR circle, so actually the X could be here as well. So Juliana, as a person who knows CPR, could be in either of these regions within the known CPR circle. The only place that Juliana can't be is outside of the no CPR circle. So Juliana can't be in the outer region, because she knows CPR, and the outer region would be people who don't know CPR. So that's the only place she can't be. But she could be inside the doctors because doctor knows CPR, or because she could be in the no CPR but not be a doctor. So now let's look at the conclusion. We've drawn the picture. Let's look at the conclusion. The conclusion says that Juliana must be a doctor. When we look at the picture, it is possible that she's a doctor, but it's also possible that she's not. And remember, for a statement or an argument to be valid, the conclusion must follow. And since we're not sure, she may or may not be, we say this is invalid. So this is an invalid argument. Unless the conclusion is guaranteed, which it's not, Juliana could be in the doctor set or outside of the doctor set, then we have to say that this conclusion is invalid. So invalid doesn't mean that it's false, it just means you can't make that conclusion absolutely. All right, let's look at a second argument. Premise 1, all ministers are married. Premise 2, Berhane is a minister. Conclusion, therefore Berhane is married. So let's draw that. All ministers are married. All means we've got one set inside the other. Remember, the inside set is what comes directly after the all. So ministers is the inside set. And then our married would be the outside set. So married people. Now, Berhane is a very specific person. Instead of me trying to put his name in, write his name in, I'm just going to go ahead and use an X again. When you're dealing with a specific person or thing, sometimes instead of writing the name into the small Venn diagram, it's easier to use an X. All right, so X for Berhane. Now, Berhane is a minister, so the X should be in the minister circle. The minister circle is all the way on the inside. That's the only location that Berhane could be, because if Berhane were in this region, that would mean that he's married, but he's outside of the minister set, so that can't be true. And he can't be out here because, again, he's outside of the minister set. And because the premise said that Berhane is a minister, we must have the X inside the minister set. So we've drawn the two premises. Now we compare the conclusion to it. The conclusion is that, therefore, Berhane is married. Okay, well, let's take a look at whether the Berhane, the X, is in the married set. Well, the X is in the minister set, and the minister set is in the married set. So X is within the married circle, the married set. So this has to be the case. So this is valid. So this conclusion that Berhane is married must follow from the fact that Berhane is a minister and all ministers are married. Now remember, validity doesn't mean that this is true or a sound argument. And I think some people could argue that premise number one is not true. Not all ministers are married. But validity is not about truth. Validity is about whether the premises as stated back up or guarantee the conclusion. And they do in this case.